Today we're going to be looking at records. Now records are another data structure that you need to understand. Here are our different keywords. Can you remember what the difference is between a list, an array and a tuple? Well, hopefully you should have figured out that a list can store a range of different data types. You can add and remove from a list. That means that it is different from an array. Remember, an array is a fixed size. It's static, whereas a list is dynamic. With an array, it must be one data type. You, however, can change an item in an array. When we look at a tuple, this is like a constant. It's immutable, whereas a list and array are mutable. That means the data values in a list and array can change, whereas a tuple can't. Remember, we have three types of data: arrays, records and tuples. Now we've been used to using arrays, lists and tuples, where we store data in an index. This allows us to identify the data stored in it. So the first data item is 0, the second one is 1, the third one is 2, etc. Well, the beauty of a record is we can actually change and store our own type of data. That means we can choose the fields in it and what we want to include. So think of this like databases. A new record can be used again and again. Here's an example: details of a customer or the details of products. When we have a database, the customer may have a name, an age. They might have lots of different values associated with them. Each person in this structure is going to be given an identifier. So that means that if you've got a person called John Smith, that identifier might be person 1. And I'm going to show you an example of this now. That means we don't have an index. Here you can see a small amount of code. Now we can store anything in a record, so we're going to use something called a tuple. You should already know what a tuple is. We did this last lesson. Now, to use a record, we need to declare a named tuple. So we have to say from collections import named tuple. You should have an understanding of this now. Have a think about what program this is importing and what method it's importing. You should have figured out the program is called collections and it's importing a method called named tuples. Now, on the second line we start declaring what we call our record type, a named tuple. Now, a named tuple, and we're going to set a named tuple to be student, name, age and the course they're studying. And we're saving that as student details. So this is our type of data. We're saying each student or each student detail has to have a student name, an age and a course. Now, the student at the front is the identifier. And if we look on the third line down, the first student we're putting into our record is ST1. And that is our identifier. This is Sam, age 30 and studying computer science. Now look at line 2 again. The identifier is student. We then have a comma, but all of the different records or fields that you want to store are not separated by commas. They're all inside one set of speech marks. So that when we start our first record, ST1, the name, age and course are then separated by commas, so Sam 30 and computer science. On the following lines you can see if we print ST1, it's going to give us all their details. So name equals Sam, age equals 30, course equals computer science. Look how it prints it out. It's actually printing it out with the type student. because that's the identifier. Look on line 2, that's where we had the identifier. It also prints out the name labels, so name, age and course. Each of those, remember, separated by a space. Puts an equal sign and tells us the value. This makes it pretty quick that we can print out a record. But if we wanted just one part, we'd have to do st1.age, and that would print just the age of that student, st1. Now, it's not just data that you can put straight in, you can also put variables. So look at the line starting st1. Exactly the same as we did before. But this time, rather than putting details in ourselves, we're using variables. These might be inputted and stored in a variable so that we can create a student. It looks exactly the same when it's printed, however in this case we've just used variables. Now this is a really important task for you. This is going to be your evidence of records and where you can go for revision and for work within your coursework. It's a massively extended program and you're going to have to spend time going through the different sections. So the first thing you're going to have to do is a simple creating a program using a record structure for a customer database for a gym. For each customer, you're going to have to store their ID number, their first name, their surname, their age, their gender, their weight and their BMI, their body mass index. The first thing I recommend you doing is trying this, testing it and make sure it works. Try printing it and see if you can get that working. Then use comments to explain the structure of your record. So everything that we've looked at over the last 2 slides. What's the structure of a record? How do we save data? How do we print data? And how do we get individual fields printed? There is a part here, why would we have an ID field? Now an ID field in a database is a unique identifier. Now this is important, remember, because we want to be able to tell the different people apart. If you had 2 John Smiths, you'd need to know which was which. Part 3, to extend your project. So make sure you can store 3 gym members. Don't hardwire those in, let them be typed into the program. The next part is to add a new record type called gym classes. In a gym class, you're going to have its ID, name, location, fitness level, which can be high, medium or low, or maximum number of people who can attend the class. You might want to add some validation here for high, medium and low. Add 3 gym classes to your program. Next, modify your program so that it uses functions and procedures so that the new gym members can be added and old customers removed. You might allow gym classes to be added and deleted as well. The next part, to modify your program so each of the clients can register for a gym class, but only if that class is not full. Think about how you're going to store this data. At this point, you may decide not to use a record. But finally, you've got part 13. Gyms often sell products for their members such as water bottles and gym gloves. Extend your program to have a record of all the different products that the gym sells. Now, in this case again, you might decide not to use a record. And then you're going to explain at the bottom of the page why you would use a record and what's the purpose. So complete all parts of the program.